Okay, Irina, thank you very much for coming today and also for sitting with us so we can have a few words about your participation. If I can begin and ask you, at the peak of Russia's democratic revolution, you created the New Literary Observer, which at the time preserved the period's powerful impulse on cultural and other major multifacets. Can I ask you, in the 24 years since that's been, how has it grown, or how have you got deeper within this?
Yes, it's really so silent at 24 years past. It's unimaginable because, emotionally, psychologically, I'm still in the early 90s. And it was, adventurous enterprise, to start this, I would say, independent academic journal and then publishing house amid the ruins of the Soviet Empire. But I think that was the best time to start new projects. And if you look at the contemporary Russia, probably almost all institutions which still are present here were created in the early 90s. And after 24 years of existence and work, I think the journal and the publishing house, in a way, I can't say that's created new academic trend, but in a way changed the paradigm quite a lot. And my idea was to break this isolation, intellectual isolation in Russia. And in a way, I'm very proud and happy that I've managed to do so, because nowadays Military Observer is read and admired all around the world, and the Slavic departments, not only that. So we have an international team of contributors who are not specialists in Russian literature or culture at all. Okay. So it became international journal, which is published in Russian, that's all. I think that's quite a difficult task, because Russia is still looked at as a kind of exotic Oriental country, but not part of European Union, I mean, in the broader sense of the word.
And can I ask you, your vision from that time, as you said, in the 1992s, it was quite a remarkable thing to do, I believe. Your vision going forward for the publishing house? Would be on the same level? Looking forward.
Yeah, in a way, of course, now the situation has changed radically. In the 90s, it was absolutely unique situation in Russia. It was an utmost absolute freedom of doing something, which is quite a novelty, I would say, after the Soviet Union, where no initiative was possible and no free words. Probably in the 90s, Russia was the most free country in this way. Okay. And it was possible to create something new, some new institution and the way of managing things, just because all the old establishment was in ruins. So, it was a unique time to start anew and to create your own establishment in a way. And so I think, in spite of all the curses, which now, are on the 90s, saying to us, I think it was a wonderful time for people who really wanted to do something.
Okay. You'd be considered to be a leading light in Russian opposition. Has that surprised you? I read somewhere in the news statement, for example, that you were very taken aback after your debate about how people saw you or how you came across. After that debate, can you explain to me what made you do it, number one, and number two, why were you surprised?
In a way, I never thought about, actual political life in a way, but I always thought that what I'm doing in a publishing house and in the foundation, because, I'm in charge of the foundation supporting culture Russian regions. I think it was always political, that's cultural policy, which I think it's very important in Russia, because probably, as you know, for many years and even centuries, all social issues were always concentrated in the cultural life, because other spheres of life were censored. So in this way, I think that was quite important in a way. But when my brother created a political party, I tried to support him. And so during the presidential campaign, I was on television, speaking with the support of Mr. Putin. It's still an interesting fact. I'm so surprised because we spoke about the importance of culture, not about politics in a way. But somehow, that's probably because the cultural issues are so important in Russia. It's became a kind of political statement. What was probably unusual to general public, I don't know whether you watched any political debates in Russia. They're very aggressive, very rude. People insult each other. That's how this, that's the style, unfortunately, way. So I chose the different tactics because it was my opponent was quite a well-known filmmaker and quite a talented person in the past.
Yes, yes.
And so I started with praising him. And, in a way, we discussed these things. I never provoked him to become rude. That was a different stylistic situation, which is quite emotional.
Yes, it's true.
So almost extravagant in many
Yes.
ways. That's why probably it was such a reaction in the public and such enthusiasm. I don't know. It's very difficult to judge yourself in this way.
And can I ask you, I believe that you published, I think it was regarding electoral fraud quite shortly afterwards, after this election, which I believe sold something like 15,000 copies a day or something, if I got it correct. Why did you do that? Why do you think it was important to do that?
Could you repeat about the publication?
About the publication, I believe, regarding electoral fraud, because you
yes,
felt...
yes. We published in Persian House. This is a very small book, but that was the witnesses at the polls, so independent observers who described their experience and how to deal with this. The tactics of in a way, and because it was during the campaign, it's become quite important. A kind of manual
Yes.
for opposition during the elections in a way. And yes, it produced quite well. I was quite happy, not only as a citizen, but as a publisher as well.
Right, okay, yes. And can I ask you a little bit about the foundation? Unfortunately, my Russian is really bad, so I can't pronounce it. I believe
it's Michael Prokhorova Foundation.
Okay.
That's my brother's name.
Which I believe has improved the cultural situation for many Russians. Can you tell me a little bit about the foundation?
Yes, it started in 2004, and at that time, that was the period of a new stage of this institutional building. I mean, in the 90s, there was quite a lot of benefactors, but usually they gave money straight to schools, hospitals, the kind of things. But the idea of the foundations, systemic support, it started from the late 90s, So in 2004, it was quite a fresh a thing in a way. And, we discussed with the brother for several years, about the concept, how to create something to really help, because they can waste, plenty of money without any results. And so, because historically, it happened that my brother started working. He was the general director of a huge plant in Siberia. And for the first time, we really faced the local communities and how people lived in the regions. And we realized that the best way and I'm sorry. And that was very depressive territories. But their depression stemmed not from the economical situation, but there was no cultural life. All the ties were broken. Sorry, I spoke too much.
We'll get some water now.
So it was important to support the local communities, to give this cultural life to them, and to connect the regions with the other parts of Russia and with the world. And we believed that cultural initiatives, it's not only theaters, but it's also education, public health, many things, should create a basis for young people not to leave the regions, because the problem is that people run from the regions to Moscow and then go like that. So they create the conditions where people can contribute to the local communities and can develop the situation there. So I think it's very important, and it was very unusual in 2004 to work with the regions, because usually in this so much centralized state with a centralized ecology, When we just announced it, people say, oh, you're quite original, you're quite eccentric working in the regions. But nowadays we can see that we're right finding this. Yeah.
You've been honoured for your contribution, should I say, to creating cultural links between Russia and America. How are those links today? How would you see those links today?
Yes, so there are very strong links. First of all, in a publishing house, we unite quite a lot of people working in Slavic and Russian studies, and so they all published either in my journals. Now I have 3 journals, by the way, and in the book publishing as well. And we, as foundation is concerned, we support quite a lot of initiatives in America, not only in Europe, in a way, especially where educational centers are appearing. So I think it's very important in a way. And you can say that they're not so visible, but I think only systemic work gives any fruit and any results. The idea that if you create a foundation and it creates huge festivals, it's great, But which is more important, that you work all year round, giving grants to people. For instance, one of the most important projects, international project, it's called Transcript. We support the translation of Russian literature abroad, the different foreign languages. And when we started, that was the first and the only one grant program in Russia, in a way, independent one. And after that, just several years, we could see this is the burst of translations of Russian authors, both fiction and non-fiction. And this is only one program, in a way.
Wow.
So you can do quite a lot of things, and suddenly you see the results.
Okay. I can ask you, Irina, regarding Russia today. How would be your views on Russia today for young people, for instance, growing up today in Russia? How do you see life for them?
I would say, that's quite a dramatic life. Of course, speaking of young people, you never speak about monoliths. Probably quite a lot of young people are quite happy, in a way, just returning to this authoritarian state of mind. But as we speak about these young people who really were growing up thinking about freedom and liberty in a way, of course, it's quite a dramatic case. But on the other hand, no one promised us a rose garden. And in the early 90s, I would say the drama of the 90s was that the system collapsed economically long before then it collapsed psychologically, in a way. So I think for young people nowadays, they need to reevaluate many things and to start fighting for freedom once again. And we understand that the road to democracy is endless. You can never stop, in a way. Of course, I hope that my daughter will live in a free society, in a way. But because we were in our prime, in the early 30s, when perestroika started, so we started new. That was the second youth, in a way. So my daughter now is 35, and she faces, this is the very unpleasant, dramatic things. But in a way, this is a challenge, and probably young people will find some way, returning to democratic path.
Okay. I can ask you, Irina, how important do you think events like the Russian Business Week are to the community in general? I know, for instance, yesterday we had some guest speakers from Russia, and there's a huge array, including our own company, Exante, here. But what do you think they give, or even from your own participation, why do you like to participate in these type of events?
Well, I think all types of discussion clubs, so to say, are very important because there is no, one solution and one set of ideas in a way. So we need this communication, different people from different professions, different views, because otherwise, this is kind of, if you speak only with people who always agree with you, in a way, this is not right, in a way. But I would say nowadays we have these huge Russian diasporas all over the world, And, they have their own experience. And because they live in an international context, they can find some new means and ideas how to deal with the situation. And it's very important. I don't like this, the Russian world, which is now part of our propaganda. But really, that's expanding of Russian culture in a way, in an international milieu. I think it's very important. And it enriches the tradition in a way, because we have a special study about diasporization of the world. That was my idea, and we could see how diasporas can enrich the metropolis with this new experience and vision and ideas. That's why I think it's so wonderful that we can communicate.
Okay, and how did you find your audience today outside?
They're brilliant.
Yes. Yes.
I enjoyed it very much. I don't know about the audience, but I was quite happy to see these faces, who are very attentive and people who are thinking and finding their own ways to live in the world. And, I always cling to this enlightenment idea of a person of the world, of a man of the world. And I think it's wonderful that young people can choose where to live, how to live, whether to return to the country or just to be part of the other communities, but still they have this basis of Russian culture. And I think it's wonderful if you can compare and absorb different traditions.
Yes. And finally, Irina, can I ask you, what have you your future plans going forward? Have you any major future plans going forward?
I have so many plans and ideas. Life is short, I'm continuing to develop my publishing house, and now I'm just starting and launching a new huge project. Together with the European University, which is in St. Petersburg. That's quite a lot of plans. And in spite of all the dramatic situation in Russia, probably, in such times, probably that's the best way to start something new. I would just give you one example. We've just recently published a wonderful book that's a collective monograph about the development of education in the Soviet Russia, which started from the 40s. This is the worst years of the late Stalinist society with the purges, hysteria, all kinds of things. In the 40s, so that stealthily, there began a kind of secret reformation of the education, and it started one by one. So by the end of the 80s, the late Soviet, it was non-Soviet education in a way. So when I speak about this systemic work with the society, this is the only way to change it radically. So in a way, so if so many people, including me, could do something important in their own field, that's what creates in future.
Yes.
It gives this fundamental basis for a new society.
Okay. Irina, thank you very much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anatoly, do you have any questions to ask?
Questions, no, we should give Irina some rest. Воды можно много, чтобы без стакана.
It's actually quite hot in here, actually.
Yeah? Okay.
I hope I was intelligent.
Yes, you were, yes.
Because switching from one
Yes,
language to
yes.
another, you need some kind of...
It's just inspiration for us, to be honest, because obviously we have to switch from Russian to English quite fast.
wish my
and to
Russian
see
was that
somebody
good, though.
do it so wonderfully, yes, and so eloquently as well.
Yes, very eloquently. It's true. It's true.
Brilliant. Thank you
It's
very
true.
much.
You're talking about me, I believe, Alexandra.
It's impossible to beat your Russian.
Yes, it's true. So you're living, or you've a place here in London as well, or not?
No.
you
I'm
were
just
flying back.
visiting.
Okay,
I'm based in Moscow.
Okay, nice.
But visiting, different cities quite
Yes.
often in Russia. I mean, because of the foundation.
Okay,
It's quite wonderful, because the country is big not only in its territory, but in different ways of life,
yes.
which are often ignored. And somehow it gives inspiration, because you can see historically there are so many different modes of life, styles of life. And I think this is probably the starting point of change.
Wow.
Because if we continue ignoring this multinational and multicultural diversity, I would say, in Russia, will never find a way. We shall return again to this, empire complex, all kinds of centralized states, which I think it's not productive in contemporary world.
And your daughter, what is your daughter doing? Is she working within
She, first of all, she is working for foundation as well.
the foundation? Okay.
Yes, and besides that, have a number, quite a lot of other projects herself.
Okay. And Anatoly has a little boy who's growing up in Russia. What age is your son, Anatoly? What age?
5. I'm about the age of your daughter, actually. So myself.
Yeah, that's the best time.
Well, probably, maybe.
You're in the prime of your life, that's great.
Promotion, I hope it's still farther down the road. Wanted to ask, I live in Moscow, and I went to maybe not to every single, but at least I think 6 or 7 gatherings of the opposition, from the very second, not the first, but the second, to some all the way to Bolotna in 2012. And I experienced all this uprising and the downfall of the moods and like that. I can't figure out like what's supposed to be next. So you have the theory of maybe small actions, or the theory of enlightenment. But as a businessman, I'm more a man of action. So what role should business play in Russia right now? So like your brother or like me on a smaller scale, right? On the one hand, we have everything to lose. On the other hand, we have maybe resources or courage or I don't know what.
I think that's the very important thing, to support all kinds of initiatives. You see, my opinion is that if you support some kinds of even cultural movement, or social movement, not political movement, it's utterly important in a way. What is going on in Russia? This is monopolization of life in every sphere. So now all individual activities are again suspicious. So what I would say the state was doing all this time, so cutting all these NGOs and other things out of foreign money, any independent support. And that's controlling in a way. It's not necessarily political parties in a way, but I think which is most important thing is to support this private initiative in different things. Either supporting animals, NGOs, supporting, children, orphanages, and many other things. I think what we really lack, this development of this grassroots democracy, but it started. We just don't feel it in a way, and I think this is important. For instance, 5 or 6 families get united because they have ill children with autism. And there are almost no centers of autism in Russia. So they're being desperate because the state doesn't support them. So they, unite their efforts with a little small amount of money. They, ask some teachers, doing something with children in a way. I think it's sounds so, what is this initiative comparing to political party? But this is the very start. If people start getting united around any local initiatives, I think that's important thing. Then, if this, horizontal ties become stronger, the society comes into the second stage. They become associated in big social movements, political parties in a way. Without these, grassroots activities, you will never create anything. That's all our parties either collapsed or became part of the official party. So clones, of this United Russia in a way. Because in a way, there is no real public support. So I think at this stage, that's very important to give people hope in the project. That's why we continue supporting quite a lot of cultural initiatives. Other people get dispersed. If they're not, just doing something, they live in the country, or, they're lost as individuals and citizens. Anyway, I think that's my opinion. We need this stage. Otherwise, you can't build a building without you know, this
Foundation.
in a way. And we always try to start building from the roof without thinking about it. That's why everything is get twisted in a way, because people understand what we're talking about sometimes.
May I ask a question? There are various countries involved: UK, Singapore, Germany, each, and a lot of other countries. Each one of these countries is proud of some knowledge that they've gathered over the last 100 years. For example, UK is proud of management. They colonized the whole world, so they have this intelligence. They built Hong Kong. Then Hong Kong model was spread out of China, so the Shanghai took the model, etc. And this is a principle of management, right? So a lot of countries use British law, for example. Singapore, they built incredible futuristic city, which is probably 100 years ahead of any city that I've been to. Germany, technology, cars, a lot of different physical, mechanical stuff that people use on a daily basis. Japan, etc., etc. So what do you think Russia has to offer? Because currently we are talking about that Russia, the dispute in the world is that Russia is losing significance. Russia is losing like geopolitical importance. What do you think Russia has to offer, the core offering to the world? So what we can learn from Russia?
Well, I understand, you know, at present, you know, first of all, I would say really great culture, which somehow not only survives but develops. You know, I didn't mention in my lecture, but all these invisible developments in the 90s, I mean, people supporting theaters, you know, and things created interesting. We have poetical renaissance in Russia, though I think not so much people understand this. We have wonderful theater, contemporary theater, with absolutely the world class in a way. Great literature, contemporary literature is very rich, and many other spheres, contemporary art, in a way, which is not second-rate.
Constraints. There are so many language constraints. You mentioned theater. It's great, but only Russians can unfortunately appreciate it because, you know, we being able to speak Russian and English, we can compare European theater with Russian theater. The European audiences have absolutely no perception
Because
of
there are
what
very
Russian
few
theater is.
tours, international tours. It says money and efforts in a way. But in a way, quite a lot of stage directors nowadays are invited to different countries to stage some in a way. So I would say after 25 years of new life, we could see so many achievements which are not obvious even in Russia. That's why probably not in the world. If you say what we can show, that's probably Russian people are champions of survival. We can boast of the strategy to survive in the most horrible conditions. And by the way, speaking about management and creativity, you know, this is the usual mythological idea that Russian people, you know, don't work, you know, and somehow they're not great in economic things in a way. But the 90s showed such wonderful creativity because the new way of life, all new institutions, start with economic, political, cultural, all kinds of things, were created within 7-8 years. On the ruins of the Soviet Empire, where I remember in 1992, it was absolute havoc. You can't find even a print and paper. You know, there was absolutely freedom to do anything, but no means to do it, you know, in a way. And it's absolutely, you know, it's almost science fiction, how people, just during several years, managed to create these different fields of activity. I would say book market just appeared out of nothing. There was no investments, was money. You know, the starting capital in the early 90s, you could sell, you know, your fur coat, old fur coat. That was the starting capital for many enterprises in a way. So, and if you look at it, it means that society is very adaptive and very creative. And so, and well, people were dilettantes when they started. No one's taught us finance, management, economy. Somehow we managed to become professionals just in a few years. The problem with Russia is that certainly this is the problem, the state and society and this authoritarian tradition, which somehow it's still not overcome, in a way. But I would say it's an interesting phenomenon. So I don't want this pseudo-patriotic stance in a way. I prefer that we should stay humility. I think probably the best way now to start and to develop your own country without geopolitical fantasies. I would say the mistake of our president that he started fighting for the geopolitical grandeur instead of developing country first. This is a huge country still. That's the greatest country in the world, and there's so many problems inside Russia. If we manage to solve it, our existence in the world will be visible very soon. In a way, that's part of this old mythology about a great empire. That's probably creates so many mistakes. I'm not the advocate of some vicious forces, and these monsters, dealing in the way. I think that's part of this old vicious mythology, which is still alive in Russia and which directs the policy in many ways. So this revelation, many things. This is, I think, very important. Because usually when people come into power, they start thinking in these mythological things about great empire, expanding instead of, intensive development on many political traditions which are quite for 300 years. So that's why I think the revolution of the mind is more important nowadays than technological revolution in Russia.
And I think also when you see a lot of the freedom for speech, especially for young people today, when they see these bans, for instance, Pussy Riot, they see these amazing professors who are theologians in the way being fired because they express certain views. It's quite scary to see that in today's age, that people with these incredible, theologian minds cannot express exactly what they feel because of the reins put on them. And I think that's something which jumps out to people abroad when they think of Russia regarding some of these fine people,
I understand, that's the Pussy Riot case. That's created a huge dilemma. And I would say, I tried to explain to quite a lot of my foreign colleagues why it's created such a fuss. I'm not talking about this official propaganda, which that was a precedent, for for censorship, all kinds of things. But I would say the reaction of people to this, and I would say, for younger generation, of course, Pussy Riot is a kind of, that's an act, in a way, this is the type of contemporary art.
Yes.
But for the older generation, just dancing in the church
Yes.
reminds of the Soviet situation when all sacralized places were ruined and contaminated. So in a way, this is the clash of different memories. I don't say that they should be punished and put into prison, this is awful act in a way in itself. But I mean that the difference in opinion, that shows that how many traumatic experience is within this society.
Yes. We have a similar thing actually in Malta now, because we have a lot of people from Libya who've come to live in Malta. And recently they've started to pray openly in public. In huge amounts, just in parks, And recently we had a case where I think over 15,000 had gathered in a park without any permission. It wasn't necessarily the fact that they were praying, it was the fact that it was done near a church space. People felt it was against the grain of their own society. Not disputing, of course, the fact that they have a right to do it, but again, it caused consternations for the wrong type of reasons. Because in Malta we live in a very kind of diplomatic, where you have to ask permission for everything and things should be done in a political way. But it was strange, connotations between the two. Again, it was just a location. It brought back bad memories to people of the times of Gaddafi, 2 years ago when we didn't have the independence. But it was interesting also.
You know, I would say what's interesting in Russia, it always reveals the most problematic things in European life. You know, if you study a Russian situation, you know it's, you know, all the problems which are hidden in some way, just kind of radical, because it's a very radical culture in a way. That theatrical culture in many ways, because the Russian modern empire and contemporary empire started in the 18th century, in the age of Baroque. And so this Baroque way of life is very evident in Russia, so everything is centralized. I would say that Pussy Riot case somehow revealed the problem, how to deal with these two system of values, I would say religious feelings and secular culture. By the way, when I was in France, you know, in many other countries,
Yes.
and because of this unfortunate, of these terrorist attacks in a way, somehow all discussions are blocked. But really, we're in the stage of the situation when the secular culture will at last and, you know, somehow gain some victory over religious feelings. We still don't know how to compare or just how to get to live side by side. And this is the problem with the Ukraine.
Don't you think it's also a very young culture in comparison to other European cultures? I mean, Russian culture.
I would say it's the same of the same age as American culture as well.
As American,
this is
yes,
two
I'm-
quite young nations, by the way. In spite of all the mythology that Russia is such a nation state, it's really young.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. In comparison to European countries, and that's why
Is
it's
it
a bit
mine
of
or
a-
not? I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Have a look. No, not mine, unfortunately.
They all sound
Yeah,
the same.
absolutely.
That's why. That's why.
Exactly.
So this is a bit
Exactly.
of a teenager mentality of being somebody young in terms of being
Uh,
like everybody else and at the same time
You
completely
know,
different.
I would say it's high time to grow up. You know, we don't have much historical time, you know, to be adolescent for so many years. In a way. It's not an argument, you know, being young is not an argument.
Well, I mean,
Have you-
exuberant and over the top.
Have you ever felt abused just because you hold a Russian passport?
No, I wouldn't say so.
The
Never
reason
felt
why I'm
it.
asking is because I would say that's one of the major problems that we as a business have, because we have Russian partners. We've been, and since we're operating with the within the financial sector, it has been a huge embarrassment for us actually to grow, because it takes 10 times more effort. I would say that if we had British national passports or other national passports, we would be much more successful. And these Russian ties are dragging us so much back that we don't know what to do with this problem actually, and we cannot address it because even though if we change passports or we structure, the only thing that we're currently thinking is like how to structure the business so that no one knows that we are in any way related to Russia.
It's a pity,
So-
well, because
and
I'm
this is
not
the
in
reality.
international business.
This is the reality, yeah.
And I would say in the publishing world, it doesn't matter whether they're Russian or not, in a way. Sometimes, of course, this political agenda influences, you know, many things, but mostly some sort of books have stopped being translated, on the contrary, started in a way. It's not so, but I would say this is a real problem. This is the negative image of Russia, which prevails in the international community. And this is the problem, how to change it. No official efforts will do in a way, but I would say this is, certain social creativity. We never thought about in the 90s, and there were so many positive things going on in Russia, but our own television showed only bandits, you know, kinds of, and so, because nowadays all the media are intertwined with each other, and the same picture is going on, you know, all around the world. So, and when I came, say, to the United States in the 90s, and I looked at the news, I say, my God, what are you talking about? It's not my country. You know, what is showing all this, you know? It is an impression that you can't step your foot on the Russian soil, you're immediately killed, or something like that, in a way. You know, the problem of this image, it's a very peculiar kind. You know, especially, I remember in 2010, when it was the year of France and Russia and there were cultural exchanges, we decided to create a festival of contemporary Russian art, not in Paris but in Lyon. Just because we work with Russian regions, we decided to do it in another city. And that was a challenge. If you want to present your country in the international context, this is the problem, how to present it. Immediately, there's a great seductions to create all these balalaikas, all kinds of things. This is old metaphors that started in the early 20th century. This is Russian ballets, Russian kokoshniks, balalaikas, all kinds of this oriental. And there are no other ways, no new instruments to show this different side of Russia, or at least contemporary. And that was an interesting challenge for us, how to present the contemporary Russian art without all this old imaginary. And we showed, something unknown. First of all, even classical things, which are totally unknown in the West. Because they have, 10 names that circulate, as a kind. But, classical music, some classical writers which are still not translated. And contemporary achievements, art which speaks about the country in search of their new identity. And that was great because that was a quite novelty for the French public. For the first time, they've seen some other face, not this typically Russian face, dancing Cossack dances in a way, but the same people, European culture, which speaks about dramatic changes in its own consciousness. I think it's not Mr. Putin, something else, but this is so different, alternative image of Russia we can have. But this should be quite a lot of attempts of the whole society to evaluate and the political will to do it. Because anytime you speak about Russishness, immediately this pseudo-folk dances appears. So Russian sarafans, all this, as a kind of, this image of Russia. I think this is the problem. That's probably in diasporas, although the world could show us something else.